All right, good afternoon, and welcome to Mapping Your Writing, Navigating Style with Alexandra Barahona, Lucy Hughes, Benjamin Lewis, and Joshua Rodkey, all of Lamar Writing Lab here in Houston, Texas. Um, we have begun recording, so everyone's aware, and we will have the school bell for the end of the day go off any moment. So apologies for that coming through, but I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our amazing panelists.
Hello, today we're going to be covering mapping your writing, navigating style. The presenters today will be
Benjamin Lewis,
Alexandra Barahona,
and Joshua Rodkey.
and me, Lucy Hughes. So today we're going to be starting off at the base camp of style, then the cliffs of convention, then the mountains of voice, the foothills of clarity, and then at the end we're going to have a final Q&A that's we're referring to as a Q&A forest. But after each individual one, we'll also have a smaller Q&A in case you have any questions you might not remember. How we're going to analyze style today will be going from a more general level down to a more specific sentence level slowly. So general, genre. The tool section is going to be more paragraphs, such like overall structure. And for verbiage, we're going to be talking more exactly sentence level. Okay, so I'm going to give it off to Ben over here, who's going to be doing the base camp of style. Sorry, we're having some
sorry
technical
for the technical difficulties. I made my life hard by letting my computer die right before the presentation started. Okay, so this part of the presentation is dedicated to why having a personal style is really important in the context of academic writing. Academic writing isn't really viewed as being a creative outlet. It's more to express an idea that is new and that you want to communicate with a group of like-minded peers. But now more than ever, it's important to have a personal style with the way that you write. Okay, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. What is a personal style? It's on the screen. It's a way of writing that reflects the way the writer wishes to write in, reflective of the mind that constructs the piece of writing. Now, this is not a tangible thing that can be conclusively decided is a thing or isn't a thing. You cannot accomplish personal style, nor can you really truly fail at it. However, it's a value that I think that we should all ascribe to, especially as tutors when we're helping to develop a writer. Okay, so why is this important? Well, as I'm sure everyone watching has heard in other presentations, ChatGPT is a thing now. I like this graph that I've seen. As you can see, papers that use delve in the title or the abstract have grown exponentially recently. Now, why is this? This is because ChatGPT is trained on Nigerian English pretty extensively. And in Nigerian English, the word delve is more common than in other dialects of English. And so now that it's more popular in an academic context from people using ChatGPT, people that aren't using ChatGPT are also using the word delve in their titles and abstracts. So this poses well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. What does ChatGPT aim to do? Well, I say that it's a continuation, something I call the technological trade-off. There's probably a name for this written by some more famous philosopher than I am. However, it is basically this. As time progresses, we trade our intentionality for convenience. So look at the Mustang in the mountains. Back in ye olden days, you had to walk everywhere, and walking everywhere kind of sucked because it was slow and it was tiring and it was not very fun. So we hitched a plan, we domesticated the horse, and we traded our intentionality. With legs, you can go anywhere that your legs can take you. There is no coordinate that you cannot go as long as you can bring yourself to that place. But that's slow, so we have the horse. But there's a trade off. The horse is a separate being that can do basically whatever the horse wants. If you're on a cliff, the horse can just throw you off, and there's no consequence. And with the Mustang now, we see something designed to take us way too fast on an evolutionary point of view, made in parts in God knows how many different places, any of which can fail and lead you to a horrific crash, and you need to worry about a road. Is there a road in somewhere? Because if there isn't, you can't go there, etc. ChatGPT aims to carry this phenomenon to writing. The trade being it can write your essay for you, very convenient. However, the intentionality is compromised because they are not your words about how you would like to express the topic. That is being expressed. So, why make the switch? The base logic is what I like to call insecure. Basically, ChatGPT can write better and or equal to me anyways. Therefore, this doesn't do anyone harm. Now, I say anyone, what I really mean is the writer themselves. Of course, there's an issue where they're putting themselves at risk of possibly running into trouble with their school administration. Not many schools are happy with students using ChatGPT on their assignments. There are issues with group members where some might be pro and some might be against. And the central one to this presentation is articulation. A lot of people that are prompting ChatGPT, frankly, don't really have a grasp on what it is that ChatGPT says. They trust that what it's saying is expressing something that is good enough, but it might not be something that they have full confidence in themselves. And another issue, which leads me to the next real logic behind why people switch, is just laziness. The writing process is not worth it anyways, and also ChatGPT can write better or equal to me anyways. Therefore, this doesn't do anyone harm, and not only that, it also saves wasted effort. Now, this kind of reveals a core problem in the academic environment when it comes to writing that now ChatGPT is becoming a solution to, which is that people view academic writing as something that necessarily must be written in an elevated way. Basically, that is to say, academic writing is supposed to look complicated because the issues that you're tackling in your academic paper are supposed to be complicated. Now, I'm going to share a fun anecdote that I think encapsulates, sorry guys, the issue. Maybe said by the most famous academic in history. It's pretty arguable. Sigmund Freud. And I'm going to read this to make it less funny. So I gave my lecture yesterday. Despite a lack of preparation, I spoke quite well and without hesitation, which I ascribed to the cocaine I had taken beforehand. I told about my discoveries in brain anatomy, all very difficult things that the audience didn't understand. But all that matters is that they get the impression that I understand it. Now, first of all, this is funny and also kind of real. Maybe not the cocaine part, but it really speaks to the baseline assumption that a lot of people take to academic writing. Academia is, at its core, somewhat of a meritocracy. You get the grade that you deserve in an ideal world, and you fight to make that grade good. And once you go into like real academia, not the academia that we high schoolers deal with, then there's also benefits in money and prestige and will I get a professorship or what have you. So that core, what matters is they get the impression that I understand it, becomes the thing that is emphasized by people when they're writing something. Now, is this the point of academia? I argue no. The point of academia isn't to show people the impression that you understand something. The point is that you do understand something and that you have something hopefully new and engaging to say to participate in a conversation with academics. And what ChatGPT is proving is that this has come to this viewpoint that is expressed in the Freud joke is coming to a head. Um, and people are looking for an alternatives. So what's the solution? The solution is to have a personal style, to accept some sort of creative writing habits to academic writing, to take it as something that might be artful, and for us as writing lab consultants to try to instill in the people that are learning how to write academic writing. And not only does this show something better that more adheres to the values of academia, in my opinion, but it also signals more that the writer does know what they're talking about. If you have one piece of writing that is in that stilted ChatGPT way versus something that might be in, I don't know, like AAVE or more dialectal English, I would say that that more dialectal English more accurately proves that the person understands the concept that they're talking about than something that ChatGPT wrote. And that's really the key takeaway of this presentation. So now I'm going to spend some extra time addressing some counter arguments to the claim here, and then we'll have a quick Q&A. So counter argument 1, what if someone's personal style is too complicated, simple, or illegible? And I say that's the point of getting better, and that's also why personal style is a value. So let me explain this using a personal anecdote. I am a classical cellist. And in that realm, a composer writes something, and your duty as a performer is to execute what the composer has written. However, no one wants to see just what the composer has written. They also want to see something more, something that shows that the performer has something interesting to say. So when you come to something like a fermata, you're always left with the question, how long do I hold out this long note for? Well, maybe if there's a woodwind that's had a hard line the whole time before you come to that hard note, maybe it's a bad idea to hold that note out for a minute because your woodwind player is going to die. They're not going to have any more air left in them. So in writing, the point I'm trying to get across is that sometimes your personal style is not the best style to be communicative. And that's the point of getting better. However, that doesn't mean that the value should be abandoned, because at all times, people that are reading do want, I think, to see something that is engaging. That's not the point of academia, but secretly, I think we all have that value when we're reading something. And also, as I said in the second point, someone's influences also make it so that no such piece of writing is truly personal, but we want to see that value anyways. Okay, counter argument 2. isn't the point of academic writing to be as legible as possible, i.e. standard English? And I would say yes, and this position would seem to support an anti-personal style position. However, academic writing isn't in standard English, and neither is the fluency of any English speaker. I think that if, of course, I was presenting live and I asked who's used the word literally wrong, most people would raise their hand. I would raise my hand. I use literally wrong all the time. And truth be told, I have never met people, I know they exist, but no one's ever said to me that it irritates them. So why for in academic writing is that such a frowned thing? To an extent, I think that that is kind of vanity in a way, or maybe it's because everyone else is beholden to that expectations that we saw in the Freud joke. Um, so um, to really wrap this point off, I want to just kind of rehash the key takeaway. Having a more personal style that maybe doesn't fit every convention, or maybe tries to use more humor or something in academic writing, is not unprofessional. And if anything, it is hyper professional. It shows more that the writer knows what they're talking about and is serious enough that they're willing to take the risk to maybe come across as unprofessional to execute their position in a way that is truthful to their position. Okay, so I think that just about wraps up what I have to say. I have a Q&A portion planned, and there's a 5-minute timer on the board, and if you want, you can ask questions in the chat. I'm not going to unmute that. That's a bad idea, actually. So if you have any questions, you can ask it in the chat, or you can unmute your mic. I don't know. I guess I'll wait awkwardly here.
You can also take questions in the room that get conveyed via the presentation.
Just to let you know what's happening, my computer lost internet connection.
Oh.
Since you are our co-host, it should carry on.
Yeah, it's working just fine.
Perfectly fine. But if it gives you a message or something whenever I read it.
Hi, we have a question.
Okay, well, I'm going to assume that no one has any questions. If anyone does, type wait in the chat very panically, but
okay.
I think I'm over time. Oh, we have questions. 1 second, please. Okay.
Yeah. The way we are set up, the chat feature is best for us where we are.
What inspired you to create the presentation on this topic? Well, at the Writing Lab, we see a lot of academic writing. Our school is an IB school, meaning that a lot of people are bringing in what is an extended essay, which is basically a
capstone project. That's the language they're familiar with.
A capstone project. I don't know what that means. But it's yeah. So, but I think that a lot of the extended essays that I've seen are, I think, kind of insecure to use or to be taken in any way that isn't primarily serious. And I also see some that also turn to ChatGPT because of that. I think is the best way to answer the question. Lucy is encroaching on my headspace in
I was
the
reading.
hours.
There's a new question.
Okay. How would you approach scientific writing with personal style in mind? That is kind of a harder question than in the humanities because, of course, I think scientific writing is supposed to be more like, I want to say jargony, but I would say that there are realms, especially in qualitative data, where somebody can be offered more freedom to I guess express what they want to say in a less stilted style, because then that's not objective hard data, because there's no way to make 3.35 any more artful than 3.35 is. In my opinion, maybe there is. We can put it in a different font. Okay. I think if no one else has any more questions, then no. Do you think AI can be a tool for writers to develop a personal style? I think, well, yes. However, I would say that that's only the case because I think reading is really the key to developing a personal style. And of course, there'll be more ways to develop a personal style later in the presentation. However, I think consuming content helps develop a writer's, I want to say, taste in writing. So therefore, yeah, I'd say that reading something ChatGPT wrote can actually help, but I think it might be more helpful if someone read a book or other academic writing, or maybe writing. I really like the David Foster Wallace essays. I think that those communicate what they want to in a very interesting style. Okay, so I think that wraps up my portion of this presentation. Because of time constraints, I'm going to have to pass it on. But yeah, thank you very much for all of your questions. And yeah, I'm going to pass it on to Josh.
Hello, my name is Joshua Rodkey, and I'm going to be looking at the cliffs of rhetoric and convention. And for my section, I'm going to be kind of exploring where we get this idea of style and really kind of the fundamentals of where it comes from. And this deals with rhetoric, which is understanding the reader-writer relationship, and convention, which is how rhetoric is shaped in the disciplines. So first of all, starting off with what shapes convention. Something with especially high schoolers may be familiar with is the Modern Language Association, MLA, the American Psychological Association, APA, or Chicago Style. These are all style guides that apply to various different subjects. And disciplinary standards are set so there is consistency, especially with citations and understanding how people can communicate across the disciplines and understand each other. And this goes not just for high school and university writing, but this idea of disciplinary standards goes into professional writing as well. Cultural and traditional standards. This is where we get how writing and communication is shaped based on geography, kind of like Ben was saying about Nigerian English. Both areas have, unique groups of people who communicate their own way, and this is reflective in writing, not only in style, but also even the basis of how languages are formed. And then we have expectations in the reader-writer relationship. We write not just to write, but for people to read. So that also means when we're reading, say you're researching a specific subject, when you're reading academic papers, there are expectations you have going into it to inform the content and language so you understand. There is not a singular style, even within a discipline, and breaking conventions can sometimes be more helpful than following them. But in the current situation we're in, especially with academia, there are still baseline ways that help us get consistent communication. So some of this includes, so just kind of understanding style includes the mode and object of critique. This is an originally Aristotelian idea in his work Poetics, from discussing forms of tragedy, comedy, and epics. So with each of these, there is a form in which things are written and done, and the expectations of what the readers and writers are then to do. So, so this is kind of the mode of critique, how we look at it, how we investigate work, and how we're expecting work to look. And mode is how we evaluate, and the object is what we evaluate. There's also understanding style is units of discourse. This quote is from Gopin and Swan. This underlying concept of reader expectation is perhaps most immediately evident at the level of the largest units of discourse. A unit of discourse is defined as anything with a beginning and an end, which can be a clause, a sentence, a section, an article, etc. So this idea of expectation is not only at the disciplinary level, but as you'll see later with something like what Lucy will talk about, there are expectations that are set even on the smallest sentence level that when we're reading, even unconsciously, we are noticing. There's also, within disciplines, we have specific rhetorical moves. Establishing the rhetorical and linguistic expectations of community members, where a rhetorical move is genre dependent and defined as a functional, not a formal unit. Castle and Kessler. Rhetorical moves are how we convey specific information, and how we want the reader to go about understanding it. And this is certainly genre dependent, but there is no defined way to do it. Rhetorical moves are functions that change how we understand something, just like in math, and there's not a set of rules that what they're not describing as not a formal unit. So when we're looking at the disciplines, this table is an example of how we kind of understand the disciplines, especially in research. So all the disciplines have standards of style, including the features of the table, which are the number of authors, pages, and citations. In medicine, we have the most number of authors, and then in law, there's the most number of pages, and also the most number of citations. When academics are going about reading works in these disciplines, that is the set of expectations that are there to be in that what you can call the academic discourse to be taken seriously. So I'm going to go ahead and focus then on literary studies, and this quote is from They Say, I Say, both, I think it's both in the 5th and 6th editions, describing literature as conversation. Nevertheless, if you can master these challenges, you may find that figuring out what a literary work is saying, offering an opinion about it, and entering into conversation and debate with others about such questions is what makes literature matter. And if you do it well, what you say will invite its own response. Your I say will become someone else's they say, and the conversation will go on and on. I think this is a very wonderful description about how we approach literature and academia, and what gives the literary studies field and discipline its value. The work we do in the disciplines has good reason, and entering into conversation and debate is what makes literature matter and brings other people's ideas to the table and allows us to share and then further our investigation into literature. For me, I did what Ben was talking about, my extended essay was in the field of literature, looking at work of Joseph Campbell and Vladimir Prop, and comparing their interpretations of mythology. And I'd worked with They Say, I Say closely. And this idea of I say and they say was a really revolutionary way of changing the mindset of going about research and academia. And it brings confidence to you because your I say is becoming part of such a bigger conversation. Yeah. So then go ahead and just answer in the chat quickly. What makes style unique in the literary studies discipline, being especially what high schoolers will be familiar with as writing about a work or giving your own interpretation of a piece of literature or similar. Just give that a quick minute. Okay, good answers here. I'm going to just read them out. Word choice, diction, lens of focus, and personal experience to add to the conversation. Keeps writing unique. Literary studies quotations, including quoted prose passages as well as dialogue. Good. Those are some wonderful answers. One more here. Style can be seen as a fingerprint and makes an author recognizable. Yeah. Okay. So that was just a quick response. So going off of this idea of rhetoric and literature, They Say, I Say includes not only this kind of new perspective that is very helpful for students, but also an index of templates to work with. These templates help establish this idea of their work in academia and focusing in on getting in that style. So these are some images from the literature section. And it gives us an interesting perspective that, we can use templates to fit into academia, but they are only just a framework for the work that needs to be done to really establish a full analysis in writing in the literary discipline. So going off of that, they say, I say, in the Writing Center, while we don't necessarily use it in our Writing Center, it was very central to our TOK class, which is Theory of Knowledge, and where students are introduced to the extended essay that we've been talking about. So benefits include the templates serve as a wonderful jumping point, as an introduction to writing effectively and getting words on paper. And they say, I say, as a whole, is a change in thinking, where writing and research as conversation is a good perspective change for students. And that's really what I got from the book. Drawbacks can be, and this falls into what Ben was talking about, it is formulaic if used in large number or often. And a student's own analysis may not show through as well. And another drawback is engagement with reading. Students should not be reliant on the outside source for their own critical analysis. They should do work as best they can themselves. But again, I think these templates serve as a wonderful framework to start. So just kind of to conclude my section, conventions and balance. Convention is meant to help us communicate and work within the disciplines, and it's not there to restrict our writing or our voice or our style. It serves, because of the situation we're in with academia and writing in general, it serves as a solid foundation to then work off of, which again can be breaking a standard convention. Writing is both, I think, an art and a science. I think this part covers how there is, in some ways, a set of rules to at least work off of, but your own voice, which you'll hear in the next section, is that art that comes in, and especially in creative writing. Style is the way we approach our own writing in conjunction with convention and rhetoric, and that's kind of my definition to pull from this section. For sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip my Q&A section. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll see what we can get to later. So we'll go ahead and move on to Ale now.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Alexandra, and I'm introducing voice and flow in academic writing. So to start off, we're gonna go ahead and jump to our first activity. So if y'all can, in the chat box, please type out what you think helps a writing piece flow. As a writer and a reader, what has stood up to you? We can take around like 2 to 3 minutes, maybe less, on this activity.
Yes, please.
Like smooth transitions between paragraphs and sentences.
Yeah, so just go ahead and say that too.
Okay, so somebody just shared smooth transitions between paragraphs and sentences, and I do think that's very helpful. Transitions, word choice, fluid sentence structure. Okay. So oftentimes when we approach academic writing, we try to write and sound a certain way that doesn't necessarily align with our individual writing style. And this can be shown when a writer tries to use overly complicated language, has long run-on sentences, does not allow for their creativity to shine through, and has a very monotone voice. Though some of these features can be used appropriately, it is important to know that just because a piece of writing may be academic doesn't necessarily mean we can't incorporate our own voice into it. So writing in a certain way that's not unique to you as an individual may just make your writing sound robotic, and flow is critical because it keeps the reader engaged when viewing your piece. So how can we accomplish this? In order to grab a reader's attention, it is really important to get the reader to be engaged with your piece, and a hook is a great way to grab your reader's attention because it speaks to the audience right away. And there are many different ways to introduce a hook. A few of these ways is to present a relevant quotation over your source of focus. This will make a reader curious on what your piece is about and how it ties into your source. A clear structure is also necessary because it allows for the reader to have a clean, panned out visual that is easy to follow. And this can be done through using both short and long sentences in your writing, as well as clean paragraph cuts. A strong and powerful thesis statements also helps a reader become more engaged because it establishes your own voice and your own perspective. And it provides focus and direction on where your writing will go. And as mentioned before, academic writing may sometimes just give off the impression that it needs to be very deep and intellectual. And this can be intimidating for many new writers. And referring to what Ben said earlier, AI has become somewhat of a backup to some writers because they aren't sure on how they should sound or what to follow. When in reality, it is suggested that we throw in our own personal voice for a more authentic and refreshing effect for the readers, rather than just to try to sound like, smart. And having sentences that will flow will help the reader be engaged and not stumped over what's going on in the story. And sentences that connect with the previous and following sentence will allow for the reader to easily grasp what's going on. When we hear the word academic, we often think that we need to over-explain a certain topic, but in reality, it's just much easier for readers to understand when the language is blunt and direct. And in academic writing, it is necessary to include evidence, and it will support your argument for research with having something to back it up. So, The Elements of Style by William Strunk gives a deep dive into how writers can incorporate style into their academic writing. Something that stands out to me in this book is when William Strunk states that writers should envision what the reader wants to see rather than what the reader's used to seeing. And I feel like when writing academically, we try to compare our works with those around us, but we forget what the reader wants to see as well. So, how can we make this easier to understand? And honestly, this can feel like a breath of fresh air for the reader because they're being presented with a different approach. And an example that I chose over incorporating your own voice into writing would be this excerpt by Gordon Allport, where he calls out certain writing tactics in Epistle to Thesis Writers. He states, your anxiety and feeling of insecurity will tempt you to an excessive use of passive voice on the basis of the analysis which was made of the data which were collected. It is suggested that the null hypotheses can be rejected. Please, sir, I didn't do it. It was done. Try to conquer your cowardness and start your concluding chapter with the creative assertion, lo, I found. You may attempt to defend your enervating use of passive voice by pointing out that the only alternative is excessive reliance upon the first person personal pronoun or the pontifical we. It is safer, you conclude, to choose self-effacement at this critical moment in your career. I reply, even in critical moments, I see no harm in saying if I means I. So in this text, he discusses how a writer's sphere can often impact the way their voice comes across in writing. You can tell Gordon Allport uses his own personal voice when writing about his research rather than keeping like a dull or a monotone voice throughout his piece. He captures the reader's attention by having a straightforward answer and evidence to support his topic. So when trying to make an effective writing piece, I think it's important to keep these key factors in mind. So make sure to write with confidence, be sure of what you're writing about, and present yourself in a strong demeanor over your topic, and engage with your ideas critically rather than just skimming by. It is very important because you balance both formality and your own personal writing style. You don't want to sound too bland, but at the same time, you can't sound too casual, because at the end of the day, you're still writing something academic. So using a clear, short, straightforward language is always best, because sometimes using overly complex words just to impress a reader will always make the most sense. And honestly, sometimes you may not even know what the word actually means. And you should also try to use transition words and phrases to go from idea to idea and make it easier for your reader to follow. And instead of simply just quoting your sources, go more in depth, analyze the source, and add some more information and context when presenting the quotation. So, when providing evidence in your text, you should also include why the evidence is important. How is this relevant for your topic? And what I found really works is to unpack your sources. And I learned unpacking in my theory of knowledge class. Unpacking is when you go more in depth over certain questions, but in this case, sources. So, you can ask yourself when unpacking, like, what's this source about? Why am I using this source? And why is it important for me and my topic? I also think that keeping your voice dominant throughout your writing is super critical, because I feel like oftentimes, especially when a piece of writing involves a lot of research, we tend to lose our sense of originality and all of the swamp of facts we're just throwing out. So it's important to spread it out and come out of the fact spilling cloud and redeem your voice throughout your paper. And as stated before, a good mix of short and long sentences can be very effective in keeping your reader hooked in your writing. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our last activity. And in this activity, I just want you to choose a topic of your choice. This can be something of your particular interest, such as a certain book, movie, whatever you want, whatever you feel like you can write about. And I want you to write one sentence in 3 different approaches. One approach will be to write to a younger audience. This can be like high schoolers and younger. And the second approach is to write like a sentence, like if you were presenting to somebody like your own age. And lastly, the third approach would be to write the sentence in a more professional manner. So this could be like you're at the workplace and you're presenting to your boss. So there's a PDF attached to the activity where it's underlined, and it's also in the chat.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it just highlights the key points that I've made throughout the slides. So just please feel free to use that, and we will spend around like 8 to 10 minutes in this activity.
The responses can go in the chat.
And the responses can go in the chat. So I'm not sure if this is a new question, but someone said, are we putting it in the chat or just talking about it like amongst yourself? And just please put it in the chat so we can read them and we can share them.
But they sure can. I think.
Like if you guys want, you guys can too, but yeah. So Miranda Davis says defensive bacteria helps fungus farming ants protect their fungus gardens from harmful mold. Sorry guys. And this is like the first approach, so this would be like, to a younger audience. And for the second approach, she says fungus farming ants along with defensive bacteria protect their fungus garden from harmful mold. And her third approach is fungus farming ants have actinobacteria that protects the fungal cultivar from escovopsis. But great response. Ashley Hall says her topic is how to engage an audience. So for her younger audience, she explains when speaking to someone, use a loud voice so they can hear what you're saying. High school, articulate your words clearly with vigor in order to capture their attention. And in a professional setting, knowing your audience is key to engaging them. So ensure your diction and presentation aligns with a specific group. These are great responses. Should we move on?
Let's go ahead and move on.
And we're going to move on just for the sake of time.
They can keep
You guys can keep answering and keep writing it out if you guys need to. And so to close off my part, I wanted to say that there are so many factors that make up academic flow and make it sound unique. And it is always going to be important to stay true to yourself and your perspective. So don't compare yourself to others around you and don't let fear stop you from expressing your own style. If you never take the risk, you never know how great it can be. And before we leave, we're going to have a quick Q&A. And you guys can just type something in the chat box and I'll respond to it out loud. So yeah, we're going to take around like 4 to 5 minutes on this.
I should have been wearing my hat. Wait, no.
So somebody shared grammar is about following rules, but style is about making choices. This is from our previous activity. And her second approach was grammar is correctness, style is eloquence. And her third approach is grammar goes unnoticed while the right style can be unforgettable.
Ooh.
And would you be willing to share?
We'll share the slide decks.
Yeah. At the end, we
and
can.
we have one more section.
Yeah, we have one more section. Thank you so much. And at the end, we can send the link for the slide deck. Okay, if there's any additional questions, you guys can just type it in and we will get to it at the end. We're going to move on to our next section. Thank you guys. Passing it on to Lucy.
Hi, y'all. I'm Lucy, as stated before, and I'm doing the foothills of clarity. So my question behind this section was, how can new academic writers balance the task of creating clarity in their writing and being creative? And I think this is a really good start to kind of understanding the problem within academia right now, which is this little Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where he says, I used to hate writing assignments, but now I enjoy them. I realize the purpose of writing is to inflate weak ideas, obscure poor reasoning, and inhibit clarity. With a little practice, writing can be an intimidating and impenetrable fog. Want to see my book report? The dynamics of inner being and monological imperatives in Dick and Jane, a study in psychic transrelational gender modes. Academia, here I come. Now, in this little cartoon, we see the thing that happens a lot in academia, where there's a parroting of past writing in academia that often has certain crutches or bad usages of tools in order not to increase clarity for the writer, but to sound smart or to sound like an academic. But oftentimes this inhibits the clarity of the writing, as he says, and makes it seem like an impenetrable thought. And it doesn't really address the fact that in academia, often the goal is not to write a paper. It is also for your paper to be informative, right? And to have conversations with others through your papers and be informative. And it's hard to be informative when you're writing in language that is clearly not there to communicate with others, but to sound smart. As we saw earlier with Ben talking about how Freud, in his example, was doing it to sound smart, not necessarily to communicate with his audience. So this is where style can come through. So how I would define style, as each of us have done, is that the guiding metaphor of classic style is seeing the world. The writer can see something that the reader has not yet noticed, and he orients the reader's gaze so that she can see it for herself. The purpose of writing is presentation, and its motive is disinterested truth. So this is from Steven Pinker, and I think this is a really good way of seeing writing, is that it's there as a way of presenting knowledge, and it's a way of making sure that people can understand it and there's clarity to the writing, and that's really the purpose of it. And so that's what we're here to tackle today, is some ways that you can really approach that, and very simple, down to the sentence level. And I will be using The Sense of Style by Steven Pinker to do this. So I think this is a really good book and a really good resource if you want to go beyond this and get more interested in this. And it's really focuses on, in academic writing and in writing in general, but mainly in academic writing, focusing on increasing clarity and some of the common things people do that inhibits clarity when writing. And that's really why it's one of the focuses of this section. So common crutches in academic writing that I'm going to be covering are 3. So I have the word of, which I'll specify later, but I'm not demonizing that word, and the zombie verbs and pronouns missing a noun. So those are my 3. An example of an overly dense paragraph is below. So I'm just going to read the first sentence. Feel free to read the whole thing if you want to. It's pretty dense, so I don't know if you want to read the whole thing, but the rest of this chapter is organized as follows. The first subsection introduces the concept of meta-discourse, followed by one of its principal manifestations, the use of signposting. So within just that sentence, I think, or technically 2 sentences, but within that simple introduction to the paragraph, we have the word of 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Obviously, an overuse of the word. Silly enough, I use that, right? But the reason that's often in academic writing is it's something we use when we speak, right? So often when we're speaking to communicate in a short thing, and we're not really revising it. We don't have the ability to revise it in time. That's why writing is such a great thing, is that it's there to have you communicating in the most direct way possible, and that's where the revision process comes in. And so the thing is, a lot of people will use the word of or some of the other crutches I use in conversation, and then will kind of just blurt that out onto the paper to communicate their thoughts in their head. But they often forget that there is a reader, and you're trying to inform or persuade that reader with your academic writing. And so you need to understand that you're not just word vomiting what you're thinking or what you would say onto paper. You're actually there to communicate your thoughts in an effective and clear way. And so here are examples of that. So the word of. So there were a number of pigs, or there were multiple pigs. Oftentimes when we use the word of, we're off and we're using it in a string of words. A lot of the times there's a substitute, not always, and that's what I'm saying. It's not demonized. It can be a really helpful tool, but sometimes that tool can become a crutch that inhibits our writing instead of allowing us to have clarity, right? So, and here we see that string along those words, there was just a quick substitution. And this is really important in the academic sense, because the academic writing we're personally encountering a lot of the time has word counts, or it is something related to college essays. And both of those, you need to make sure every word has a purpose. So this is a really good thing to look at to go, okay, is this word having purpose, or is this string of words having purpose? And is there a substitution that could increase clarity and then even maybe cut down the word count? The next one is zombie nouns. Verbs can be drained of life when they are turned into adjectives. For example, when contribute becomes contributive, or aspire becomes on the aspirational level. Zombie nouns and adjectives are one of the signatures of academics. So both of these examples you can see very clearly within academia overall. And it's not necessarily, again, a bad thing. These are all things that can be done appropriately, but are often overused and are done as a way of kind of copying the style of academia. But as multiple presenters here today have talked about, it's not necessarily there to mimic bad writing. And I think Ben really highlighted this when he talked about a lot of the time our taste is based on what we consume, right? A lot of writers have their style of writing based on what they're reading. And so in academia, when this habit is so fraught, we have the problem of people copying this bad habit. And especially at the level that we're at, which is in high school where people are starting off, it's good not to start off with these habits and to really help people not start to rely on these now so they don't have them later. And they can kind of check themselves now instead of developing the habit and then having to really work back on it later. So another little cartoon is incomplete implementation of strategized programmatics designated to maximize acquisition of awareness and utilization of communications skills pursuant to standardized review and assessment of languaginal development. The reason verbal SAT scores are at an all-time low. So this right here is full of zombie nouns. It's also full of the other thing I said, which was the of, right? Which you can hear me saying throughout this. But it's because I don't have another word to substitute it with that I'm not going back and proofreading. And this is the same thing. This is him taking the actual action out of it and taking the actual knowledge and what he's trying to communicate to necessarily sound academic, maybe not on purpose, but it's often the language that we see. And it's the very thing that I'm trying to avoid or encourage y'all to avoid. Now, the last thing I will be covering today is missing nouns. So a lot of the time we see the missing noun when we're here in the academic center or in general. So she went to the mall versus Sally left the house, then she went to the mall, or simply Sally went to the mall. Oftentimes we see pronouns missing a noun. Pronouns are great. They often are referring to something that we need to know preemptively beforehand. And these nouns aren't necessarily she's or he's. They can be thing. So something that often happens is that people will say, there are a lot of things you can use, right? And they'll be referring to tools or people. So you could say there are many tools you could use. And they're obviously substituting the word thing. And that is a common pronoun where people are substituting and haven't really referred to a past tense, or there's a better word to substitute it with. Either way, they're missing a noun. And that's really counterproductive to what you're trying to do in academia, which is to describe. Also something, and inform. And also something that we see a lot is that someone will refer to something that they said in a past paragraph, but they've already edited that paragraph and it's no longer applicable there. And that's something to catch a lot is when you see a pronoun and you can't find it, that's a really good tool to use to kind of go back and be like, what is this referring to? And to make sure that you're not discombobulated within your editing, right? So as I referred to in the ladder, and then you don't really see that what that ladder is referring to and if it's directly related. So you need to make sure that you're tracking that in your writing. And also, as a consultant, when you're reading it, and a lot of the time our thing is reading it as a secondary person to read it, not to edit their papers, and going, hey, I see this and I can't really see what this is referring to. Can you tell me what this is referring to? Asking a little neutral question of what is this referring to? I don't know. And oftentimes they will look at it and they will either catch it or they will redirect you towards it, and they can see if they might want to put more clarity to that section. Which again brings me to one of my final slides, which is the application of this in Writing Center. So the two main things that we see in the Writing Center that are related to this are college essays and AP/and IB longer text. So for college essays, we have a limited word count. So a lot of these tools that can cut down on the word count are really great. We have a target audience. So oftentimes we know not exactly, but we have a reference of what they're looking for. And so it's a really great to have that knowledge and then go back from there with the language that we're using. And then every word should impact the reader. This is really, really important to college essays due to this limited word count, one thing, and two thing that is something that's related to how you're describing yourself and storing this limited word count and trying to make it more vivid and impactful on the reader, right? And so this is why it's really important that we don't use some of these crutches, or that when you're reading it as a writing lab consultant, that you can go, hey, like, what do you think the admissions counselor is getting from this? And how could we maybe improve that clarity? Because you have that target audience, you can really work on that. And especially in college essays, clarity is paramount. So that's why a lot of these tools can be really, really helpful. And then for AP and IB, we again have this limited word count that is more in the academic setting, more applicable to this slideshow and this what we're talking about today. And then we have a target audience still with that, which is a grader. So in a lot of these, there are, for AP and IB, you have these somewhat capstone projects. And in IB especially, which is what we're most familiar with, we have the EE as our longer project that is a 4,000 word essay. And you have it to where it's a more long-term, over the span of a year project. And it's something where you have a grader in mind, and you're kind of working off of the fact that this person may not have perfect knowledge on your subject. So you have to give a clear background, and you need to make sure that every word is kind of making sure you're creating that clarity, because oftentimes the subjects are very broad and you're trying to put a lot of information into one 4,000 word essay. And also with the IAs, they are done internally. They are internal assessments, but then they're graded outside. So you again have a target audience that you can work off of and go, hey, is this creating clarity to that grader, right? And then foundational for habit building with novice academic writers. I kind of touched on that earlier, but when we're doing this, oftentimes the reason IB or AP has this is so that you're building a foundation of writing academic papers, right? So you're learning these and you're building a solid foundation and making sure you don't develop these habits too quickly, right? Or just not getting them at all, hopefully. And so it's a really great thing when we at the high school level can use some of these tools to kind of correct those, or make sure that we're checking in. We're going, hey, just an idea. Let's look at this. And okay, I don't know what's going on because of these things. Do you want to work on that, right? They're just tools to look at, not necessarily to always implement, right? A lot of those zombie nouns can be useful sometimes, or a lot of the word of is really helpful. Sometimes, though, it can inhibit clarity. So in conclusion, I have this little in the foothills Sound of Music scene because it's her playing music to children. And I think it's a really good, helpful reminder for me visually that when you're writing in academia often for an audience and to communicate, and it's somewhat performative in that sense. And so that's why clarity is so important, because you're doing it to an audience and you need to make sure that we are making sure that principle is clear within your writing so you can be the best writer you can be. Okay. Q&A.
Yeah, we have just one or 2 minutes, so we might be able to take a question. But if you need to go, that's fine. We have a bibliography with some additional resources from my sections and others that you can look over, and that is both in that QR code, and I will drop a link right now.
And then someone asked a question, so I'll.
How do you?
Yeah, we have more than one computer.
How do you have a constitutional student style voice distinct, which is
Okay.
right?
Okay, so how do you handle a consultation where student style and voice are distinct, which is great, but look like it might conflict with some standard conventions? So I think with that, it's often based on who's coming in and what the purpose is. So the first question we often ask is, what's the purpose, right? So in this sense, if it's a consultation where student style and voice are distinct but don't meet certain conventions, if it's an academic paper, in our sense, it's for IB, right? So we have an internal assessment, and it's something that needs to have some formality, especially if it's a scientific paper. I think oftentimes you can go, okay, what's the rubric for this? Because often in our rubrics, there'll be specifications on the type of language, or they'll have example internal assessments that you can refer to. And if that person's goal is a certain grade, you can go, well, if this is your goal and this is your purpose and this is your writing, you might want to think about changing this. But if they're not interested in that, that's not for you to force them to do. Your job is only to guide them, not to force them or to be like, oh, you have to do this or you're going to get the worst grade. It's, if this is your purpose and this is your goal, you should do this. And here are some tools I have to help you with that.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Lucy says too.
Oh my God.
Oh, I thought that was a fire
How is
alarm.
this?
That's
There we
our
go.
timer.
Okay,
So
well,
this is the last question.
Okay, so well, damn, now I forgot.
Okay.
So wait. I'll come back. It's also really vital to I guess show the student that they are creating an effect with the choice that they're doing. That's something like musically that I found that when I workshop things musically, it's really more important to almost sing. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, or I'm gonna be coherent. Um, in a music workshop, usually the person plays and then the teacher puts it open to everyone else in the studio to provide a comment. Oftentimes, when people are providing comments, they'll just say, "You did X thing wrong." Generally speaking, that's not the way that you want to give someone a note. Instead, you want to draw their attention to what it is that they're actually doing. When you're playing music, you're hearing it in your own context. You're hearing it the way that you want to hear it, but that might not be how it's actually coming across. So just to add on to Lucy, in the writing lab, maybe being like, hey, you putting a comma here puts the stress different, so now it sounds clunky. Can you try reading it out? Might be a good way to alert that person that there may be a problem that needs fixing. So then that can put it in their head to look out for that problem rather than just looking at the one thing and then correcting it and then letting all the other things go away uncorrected.
Okay, yes, that's unfortunately that's our time. I know Dr. Lowe put her email in the chat if you have any other additional questions or need to reach out. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciated it. Thank you for your participation, and also to everyone in the chat who asked questions or participated in our activities.
Yeah.